Hey everybody, it's Austin from Two Techie Travelers. Here today we're going to be talking about what it takes to become a UAS drone pilot. As you all have probably seen in our videos, we incorporate quite a bit of drone footage in the places that we travel to. I am a FAA certified Part 107 commercial drone pilot, so all of our shots are taken legally, in case anybody was curious about that. So what we hope to cover today is kind of a primer for those of you that are looking at either getting started with a drone or those that might already have a drone but are nervous to fly them in different areas. We're hoping to give you the information you need to be able to kind of step into that world, to be able to understand what the laws mean. Especially if you're reading something for the first time, it can be kind of hard to follow. So we're hoping to kind of just be a little bit of a more friendly way to consume some of that information. Disclaimer, while this video is providing factually accurate information, we are not lawyers. This is not legal advice. This video, again, is to provide you the context that you need to do the further research so that you have, confidence that you're flying legally and safely. Before we dive in too deep, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about one thing, and that is that drones are more legally referred to as unmanned aerial systems and sometimes as small unmanned aerial systems. That's UAS or SUAS. So if you're reading through some applicable laws and you see unmanned aerial systems or unmanned aerial vehicles, those are typically referring to drones, just in a more kind of common legal phrasing. So I will use the phrase drone and UAS here interchangeably, just so that we're all aware of that. So to get started, we're going to start by talking about the federal regulations and the federal jurisdiction of UAS operation. The Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, is the only entity that can restrict where you can fly when you're in the sky. That's not to say that states and local municipalities can't regulate certain aspects of drone operation, but the FAA is the one that you want to start with when you're looking into whether or not you could fly in an area. States and local governments, as we'll cover here in just a minute, have the ability to restrict takeoff, landing, and operation of drones on publicly owned lands, and you need to be aware of that because some jurisdictions have tighter restrictions than others, and some have outright bans. You want to make sure that you're flying legally. So here in a little bit when we're talking about the state and local regulations, we'll give you some more context on that. At a federal level, the law that dictates UAS operations is Title 14, Chapter 1, Subchapter F, Part 107 of the Code of Federal Regulations, commonly known as 14 CFR Part 107, or simply as Part 107. That is the federal law that dictates what you can and cannot do with an unmanned aerial system. The FAA also puts out additional guidelines for pilots to ensure that everybody is operating under the same framework, the same guidelines, so that everybody can remain safe. The FAA categorizes UAS operation into 4 types: recreational use, commercial use, public safety and government use, and educational uses. Each of those have their own set of rules and requirements to be able to fly under that classification. So you want to make sure that you know what designation you want to fly under so that you can know the guidelines that you have to follow. This video is going to be focused on the recreational and commercial use. That is going to be typically those of you that are just trying to fly your drone for, say, social media use are going to want to follow. So the first one we're going to talk about is recreational use. The FAA defines recreational operation of a unmanned aerial system as strictly for the enjoyment of it. So they put restrictions on you cannot do it for commercial purposes, even if the value that you would be receiving is non-monetarily. That includes goodwill. So if you're flying for a charity organization or something like that, where you're not charging them, that's still a commercial operation. If you're doing anything beyond just flying for fun, they consider that to be commercial use. And that includes, which is especially important to people that are looking at flying for social media to know, you can't post the videos or photos that you take with the drone if you're flying under the recreational exception. That is the FAA rules. That's how it's laid out, whether or not it makes sense or not. So that's just something to be aware of, that if you're posting drone footage on your social media and the FAA gets wind of it and you're not licensed, they are known to come after content creators for that. So just be aware of that. If you are looking to fly commercially, and that again includes posting on social media, Part 107 is going to be the type of categorization that you want to fly under. Part 107 allows you to fly commercially. That includes for business operations, social media. If you're going to fly for, a real estate company, all of that is included under Part 107's commercial license. Part 1, to become a certified Part 107 pilot, does require a knowledge exam to be passed. There's a $175 testing fee, and it covers a lot of the basics about aviation in the United States. It's going to cover the types of airspace, safety operations, and some other topics. Typically, it's going to require a little bit of studying. For me, it wasn't a very difficult exam to pass, but for others, if you have less exposure to aviation, it will take you a little bit of studying to do. Some of the benefits of Part 107 over the exception, beyond just the ability to use your materials commercially, is you have some expanded flight capabilities, and you can apply for waivers over some flight restrictions. There's a whole list of those waivers that can be applied for on the FAA's website, just to cover some of the important ones. They allow for nighttime operation, flying outside a visual line of sight, flying without a visual observer, flying over people, operating over moving vehicles. There's a lot of really useful ones, especially depending on what you're actually trying to do with your UAS. But being a Part 107 pilot gives you the benefit of being able to apply for those waivers. It's important to note that being a Part 107 certified pilot does not allow you to do those without a waiver. You have to apply for the waiver and wait for it to be approved before you can take any of those actions. The flight rules for the recreational exception and the Part 107 certification are pretty much the same. You're going to have to follow the same basic guidelines, and you're going to have to follow the same basic protocol for being able to operate in certain airspaces. Some of the initial setup and compliance components for both of them are going to be pretty much the same. Step one, no matter what you're doing for a drone operation, is to take a trust certification exam and then have a copy of that certification on you while you're flying. That is an FAA requirement. You can find a link to the FAA's webpage discussing the trust certification in the description below. If you're going to be flying for commercial use, the next thing you're going to want to do is apply for a Part 107 certification. That is going to require you to have taken the proof of knowledge certification exam, and you're going to have to wait for that to be approved before you can undergo any commercial operations. The third thing you're going to want to do is register your UAS with the FAA. Whether you're flying recreationally or commercially, this registration is going to give you a registration number that you put on the outside of your drone. I recommend using a label maker. Plenty of people just write it on with a Sharpie. Either way is fine as long as it's marked. If your UAS is under 0.55 pounds or roughly 250 grams, you don't have to register it. Personally, I still recommend it. It only costs about $5 to register, and it gives you that registration number. So if something were to happen to your UAS where you crash into a tree and you are not able to recover it, if somebody does stumble across it, it gives them a way to track it back to you so that it may potentially get returned. In addition, if you have a registration on your UAS, people are going to be a little less worried about you operating in certain areas because they're going to assume that you have taken the steps needed to be flying legally. So it just gives you kind of that buffer. And then there's two more things I recommend as kind of the initial setup that aren't required by the FAA, but are certainly worth your time to do. The Before You Fly app is a fantastic resource. We'll provide a direct link to that in the description below. That is going to show you what airspace you are attempting to fly in, whether or not you can fly there, and if you have to request any authorizations, it will help you figure out where you need to apply for those authorizations at. Which leads me into the second thing I recommend, which is going to be a Lance provider. We'll go into some more detail on Lance here in just a second, but having the ability, Lance basically provides you the ability to request authorizations for certain places automatically. And there are many different applications for this from companies that the FAA has partnered with, and we will provide a link to the FAA's webpage discussing that. For every flight, before you get started and while you're flying, whether you're flying commercially or under the recreational exception, you're going to want to follow the following rules. You're going to have to follow the safety guidelines of a FAA recognized community-based organization. At the moment, the FAA has not started to recognize these organizations, so they have a set of temporary guidelines that they've put out that you can follow. When community-based organizations do start getting recognized, they will put out their own materials, and you're going to want to make sure that you have a copy of those on you at all times. That way, if somebody asks, what safety guidelines are you following, you can show that you have a physical copy. The next thing is you're going to want to keep your drone in visual line of sight. A lot of our drones and UASs are able to fly well outside of visual line of sight, at up to thousands of meters into the air, kilometers away from us. But if you can't see it, you aren't sure what's going on with it. You could be interfering with life flights, helicopters, low-flying planes. You have no idea what's going on. The FAA requires that you keep that visual line of sight for that reason. Again, if you have a Part 107 certification, you can request a waiver for that visual line of sight. But they're pretty strict on what they're going to allow that waiver for, so they don't just give it out for any reason. The next thing is you're going to want to give way and not to interfere with any manned vehicles or operations. If there are people around, your UAS is a danger to those people, whether they're on the ground or in the air. So you're going to want to make sure to keep your drone well clear of anything. That includes low-flying airplanes and helicopters. The next thing is, no matter where you're at, you're going to need to fly under 400 feet above ground level. As a Part 107 pilot, there are some exceptions to that, but as a recreational flyer, 400 feet is the max that you're going to be allowed to fly, regardless of the airspace designation that you're in. To fly in Class B, C, D, or E airspace, you have to request prior authorization, and with that prior authorization, there will be restrictions on how high you can fly, and sometimes that is below the 400 feet maximum. You will very often see near airports or population centers where you can only fly up to 50, 100, or 200 feet. So you want to make sure that if you do have prior authorization, you're still complying with your altitude limits. And then next, but not the least, is you need to ensure that you are not operating your UAS in a dangerous manner. Flying too close to people, flying too close to wildlife, flying recklessly, operating while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. All of those are prohibited. You cannot fly your drone in a way that could potentially hurt others, whether those are people or livestock, animals, anything of the sort. The next thing that we're going to be discussing is Lance, which is a utility that the FAA has partnered with private industry partners to bring to UAS operators like myself and you. What it does is it provides you a way to request authorization to fly in those Class B, C, D, or E airspaces near large airports. The Lance program has expanded to more and more airports, and over time, we expect that to continue to incorporate all controlled airspace in the United States. Lance provides you a way to request prior authorization for takeoff and landing in those areas so that you can operate safely. What Lance does is it ensures that not just you have authorization, but it also informs other UAS pilots in the area. It informs air traffic control, and it keeps a well-documented index of where each UAS operations occur so that if there is an incident, they can track that back quickly to understand what happened in the event of an emergency. Lance is a especially useful thing for Part 107 pilots where you are going to be flying a lot of different places. So you're going to want to make sure that you have the ability to fly in those areas. Lance can also be used for certain waivers, and that's been expanded a little bit in the last year or so, and we expect it to continue. Some of those waivers can be applied automatically within certain parameters, but sometimes those waivers will take up to 90 days to process. While we are still on the topic of federal jurisdiction over flight, it is important to mention that each federal agency, whether that's the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fishery and Wildlife Service, or the National Park Service, there are many others. Each of those have the jurisdiction over their managed areas to create rules, just like a state and local government, that allows them to restrict the takeoff, landing, and operation of unmanned aerial vehicles on their property. The National Park Service has well documented that flying UAS on their property is prohibited without special permission use that is authorized beforehand, and they're very restrictive on who gets that access. We'll have another video coming up about our process of trying to obtain those for a couple of different parks here in the near future. If you are looking to fly in an area where there is a national park or some other federal land nearby, you want to double check to see who owns that and what their restrictions are for that area before you fly. That is going to be a pretty key thing to make sure that you're not breaking the law or the regulations. Before you fly does mark national parks as restricted flight zones. That is helpful. I have not verified that with other services, federal services, such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So you want to make sure that before you take off, you know that you're allowed to fly there. Moving on from the federal jurisdiction, I want to talk a little bit about the state and local jurisdictions. That is what the state and local governments can do to restrict the operation of UASs in their areas. Much like with the certain federal agencies, the state and local governments have the same authority over their managed areas for takeoff, landing, operation, and to some extent the manner of use for how UASs are operated. Throughout the country, we've seen states like California place laws about how drones can be used that have been taken to court, and some of those have been upholded and some of them have been rejected. So the landscape of UAS is definitely changing often, but it's pretty well documented that a state entity or local entity has the authority over takeoff, landing, and operation of drones on publicly owned lands that the city, state, or county owns. You will often see state parks not allow UAS operations within their borders for safety reasons, much like with the National Park Service. You'll see some cities ban the operation of UASs off of publicly owned parks or publicly owned lands, including sidewalks and streets. So it's important to make sure that when you are looking to take off from a specific location, that you have an understanding not just of the airspace, can you fly, but also an understanding of what's happening on the ground level. Who owns it? What are the restrictions for it? And making sure that you are 100% within compliance from the city level to the federal level. Because at any point in that chain, if you're breaking one of their guidelines, ultimately you can get in trouble, fined, or possibly imprisoned for flying your drone. So you want to make sure to take the time and understand all of that. In our next video on drones, we're going to take you through what it looks like for us when we're scouting out a new location that we have not flown before, the steps we take to ensure that we are in compliance at all the jurisdiction levels and that we have no problems. The last thing that we want to do is to jeopardize anybody's safety or break the law. With this video, we hope that you found the information not only useful, but also that it helps lead you into further investigation on how you, as a UAS pilot, can fly not only safely, but legally. The information that we've provided in this video should be a pretty good basis for you to do further research on your specific area and your local and state jurisdiction to ensure that you fly safely. Thank you all for watching. If you would like to get more content like this where we talk about the laws surrounding UAS operations, some tips and tricks, and really how we fly our drone, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon if you want to get a notification about our videos coming out. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can. You can follow us at 2 Techie Travelers on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok. Take your pick of a social media platform and you could follow us there. Again, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.